was born with the gift of the gab. With MagMongoSlade. Shoot. He don't miss.
Welcome to 3 Count Commentaries. This is your host, MagMongoSlade. WrestleNomics. They did it again, y'all. They put out a couple of graphs. I got a bunch of people arguing. But if you follow this channel, then you know that you're not surprised by the graphs at all. So let's talk about these graphs. These are demographic graphs. I only got 2 of them because I do not give WrestleNomics money. Sorry, Brandon Thurston. You do good work compiling Nielsen data, but I will not give you money. So he put together 2 graphs that I'm going to discuss. And these 2 graphs are very interesting. They're both on demographics, one about race, the other about income. So let's do the too long didn't listen version. More white people watch AEW. Fewer black people watch AEW. But the AEW audience makes more money on average than the average WWE viewer. I swear I've been talking about this for a year. As a matter of fact, I knew this when Tony Khan was talking about it. So what do you mean? Well, get back in your time machine. So before we get to WrestleNomics, let's get back in our time machine to talk about Tony Khan bragging about the AEW fan base. This is from 2021. I'm going to use Wrestling Inc. because it's the first thing that popped up. So Tony Khan was talking to Bloomberg Business about AEW's audience. He says that they have the youngest skewing audience of all sports programming on all of television. There have been more weeks than not in the past several months where we've beaten every major sporting event in terms of the youngest skewing audience. Our Wednesday night show and our Friday night show have both been rated as the #1 show on cable in the 18 to 49 demographic. We have a more affluent fan base than other wrestling organizations, but really people from all kinds of backgrounds. They are more likely to be college-educated audience. They're a very attractive audience to an advertising base, particularly with the age demographic that they add. Having such a young, engaged audience is really important for us, and it's also a very consistent audience. This year, so many times we've been the #1 show on cable, and you can really count on our fans to come and watch the show every Wednesday night. Again, this is from 2 years ago. So we knew this then. I talked about this when it occurred, that AEW's fan base is mostly white males. So one of the stupidest arguments I've seen people argue on Twitter and anywhere, and it's not really an argument that you even need to have because you shouldn't be taking it personally. In the United States of America, white males make more money on average than pretty much everyone else in the country. It is not some big secret, okay? White males make more money on average. So if you're out here like, oh, I'm black and I got a college education, and it ain't got nothing to do with that. We're talking about on average. So we ain't talking about any individual person. AEW fans, on average, typically are white males. So when they say they have a more affluent fan base, what they mean is we have more white males. And I talked about this at the time when it happened. Okay? When he said this, I talked about it. When SmackDown got knocked off its perch by Fox, I said the exact same thing. It's because WWE has a more diverse audience. These people tend to be lower income. And since income is tied to education, that means that the WWE audience has a lower education. I'm just a small-time sociologist. I took a couple of sociology classes. It's not that big of a deal, really. But people looked at this WrestleNomics thing and just started jumping to all kinds of conclusions. Oh, AEW should go to Fox because they have a more affluent fan base, not understanding marketing at all. But we'll talk about that in a second, which we've talked about on this channel before. So if you're a long-time listener, you probably heard me say some of this stuff before. But let's get into the WrestleNomics race discussion. So instead of doing this thing, which probably would have yielded similar information, but would have been in fewer graphs, you probably could have just done WWE, AEW, and other, or WWE, AEW, Impact, whatever. Instead, they did it by television show. So WrestleNomics put out what is like 9 graphs that tells us about the various races and who is watching these products. There's one thing that is universal. White people are the majority of the wrestling fans, which should not be a surprise to anyone. All right. So each wrestling promotion, every single one on this list, has over 50% white people. And if you look really closely, you can see that it's almost 60% white people in every wrestling promotion. There's the highest levels of whiteness are in AEW Dynamite, where 68% of the audience is white. In AEW Collision, where 67% of the audience is white. And New Japan Pro Wrestling on Access TV, where 66% of the audience is white. For comparison, SmackDown has a 57% white audience, WWE Raw 59%, NXT 56%, Impact 60%, and WoW at 57%. So all of the AEW and associated products would include Impact and New Japan because they were working with Impact for a while. And New Japan is basically a sister promotion to AEW now. All majority white people. Now, the big argument has been coming out amongst the blacks, specifically about AEW Dynamite. AEW Dynamite has the lowest black audience on this list at 16%. Now, I'm not going to debate about why black people are not watching AEW Dynamite, because it's much different when you look at Collision and Rampage. 16% for Dynamite, but for Collision is 21%, and for Rampage is 23%. Now, you have to ask the question, what the hell is on Dynamite? That's the problem. Or what is Collision and Rampage? What do they have that Dynamite does not? Why is, and this is a large jump. This is 5 or 6 points here. All right. Now, for comparison, SmackDown has 26% black audience. Raw, 25% black audience. NXT, 27% black audience. So there's not that much variation between the three. NXT tends to, especially right now, it's pushing more black talent. So you probably have, just a smidgen more black people watching NXT than watching SmackDown. Okay? But it's not the big gulf of a difference like between Dynamite and Collision, which is 5 points. That's a lot. And Collision is taped. And here's the traditional position would probably be, well, one is on network television or something like that. The other is on cable. The reach of one is greater than the reach of another. But TNT and TBS are essentially in every household. I don't see there being a huge difference between TBS and TNT. And then when you look at NXT and Raw, it's about the same damn thing. It's all about the same because they're on the same network. But when you look at, let's say, Raw and SmackDown, it's still very similar. And SmackDown's on network television. So something's up, specifically with Dynamite, that black people are not watching it on television. The highest black audience is in WOW, Women of Wrestling, which has a 31% black audience. I'm shocked by this because I have no idea what's going on that show that's got black people watching it. But I would imagine it has something to do with the show being on network television. Now, this ties into the income level. Black people are less likely to have cable than whites because black people have lower income than whites. So typically they will watch things that are more readily available to them, like stuff that's on network television. Now, that's a typical argument, and it would be a fairly sensible argument. It's an estimate. It can always be debunked with greater information, but that's kind of what I would imagine is WOW was on regular television. But if you compare WOW to SmackDown, SmackDown is also on network television. It got 5 points over SmackDown. The black audience on SmackDown is only 26%. So it's hard to tell, but it's interesting to note, right? That's the thing about this. Like, you're not supposed to take this stuff and look at it and start applying it to your life or applying it to business, because WrestleNomics, what they did is they seemingly compiled all of this information from Nielsen, and that's only one metric. That's not enough in order to make multi-billion-dollar business decisions. Okay, you might not want to jump to too many conclusions, but we can make some estimations, and we'll talk a little bit more later about similar things. All right, so now the Hispanic audience is about the same everywhere. Hispanics make up between 9 and 12% of every wrestling fan base. The highest being SmackDown, Raw, NXT with 12%. The lowest being WoW with 9%. But AEW and Impact are 10 and 11% respectively. And Dynamite is about that same range, and so is Collision. So it's not a lot of variance between the Hispanic audiences. Hispanics just like wrestling. In Mexico and Puerto Rico, which are the two greatest populations of Hispanics in the United States, both treat wrestling like a religion. Like, wrestling in Puerto Rico is a religion, and in Mexico, you can become a god by being a pro wrestler. So they pretty much just like wrestling in general, okay? That's just, of course, on average. I'm pretty sure you got some uncle and he hates wrestling. He hates everything about it. We're not talking about him. We're talking about on average, okay? Now, the Asian audience, I don't understand why they even put that on the graph. Like, this is one of those things where I criticize them for too much information, because Asians and other races probably could have just been smooshed together, because Asians are a small population in the United States in general. So they are a small population in terms of the wrestling audience. They don't even give you numbers for Asians, except for AEW Dynamite, which is 3%, and AEW Collision, which is also 3%, and New Japan Pro Wrestling, where Asians are 0. I know that was some of the funniest thing, is everybody's like, New Japan Pro Wrestling, no Asian who watched the show. It's for white dudes. Now, this is where you have to get the idea that this is only in one country and only on television, right? Because you can't tell me that, there's no Japanese Americans watching New Japan on television, pretty much there's just not a statistically significant number of them. Statistical significance would vary depending on where you're going with it. But I think under 5% is not really statistically significant. That's just me trying to remember stats, and I don't remember it that well. But it also apparently is 0 when it comes to Impact too. Now, since Impact and New Japan are on the same network, I would imagine it's just places that have Asians. They don't have this channel. They probably just don't have the channel. And plus, again, it's just television. If people want to watch New Japan, they'll go to New Japan World. All the stuff on Access is reruns anyway. It's usually weeks later, months later, shortened up for American television. So it's not exactly like they're playing Wrestle Kingdom live on Access and, nobody's watching it. So you got to cut them some slack. They're on a number 95 network on cable that not everybody has. And it's a day-old product. So, what do you expect? So we actually get into the women's and men's, the gender debate about whether producing more women on your television equals more women watching the television. Now, there is some evidence for this. Wow, Women of Wrestling has the highest female audience of all of the shows here, with 41% female. followed by Raw and SmackDown, both with 36%, NXT with 35%, Collision for 34%, Rampage at 35%, Dynamite at 32%, Impact at 28%, and New Japan at 24%. Now, interestingly enough, WOW, an all-women's wrestling promotion, got the most female audience in this survey or this graph. What people will say, look, Mongo, we were right. If you put women forward, more women will show up. I would say, okay, well, explain Impact, where women have been world champions and women are forward on the product, and only 28% of the audience is female, which is substantially less than Raw, SmackDown, and NXT. Now, for the WWE, several years ago, Stephanie McMahon said that their female audience is about 40% of, this is about in line, rounded up to the nearest rounded up to the nearest 10, rather. It would be 40%. So, if you round everything to the nearest number, Raw, SmackDown, NXT, and WOW have 40% female. But for some odd reason, we get another big gulf here between Dynamite and Rampage. Like, what is it on Rampage that has more women watching Rampage than watching Dynamite? Like, it's a full 3% difference. You would think that these shows, like, how is these AEW shows so far apart when the WWE shows are so much closer together? It's like one company produces 3 different products, and pretty much everything is within the same range. But AEW, if things are like really wild, more people are watching Rampage. Females are watching Rampage and are watching Dynamite or Collision, but Collision is at least close to Rampage. So I don't know. That's hard to explain. And but WOW having a massive female audience, I'm actually quite surprised at that. I'm surprised at the whole WOW scenario in the first place. I'm just surprised that they still exist. But that just goes to show that there is some audience for a syndicated wrestling promotion. Now, the female audience is an interesting thing because it's always hard to pin down what is interesting to women if you're not a woman. You know, me not being a woman, I don't know what women like to watch on television. I would imagine it would be the dramatic elements. And that's one of the things that I know that WOW does, is they do a lot of out-of-control characters, a lot of dramatic elements. That features mostly female characters. I don't know if it's like a soap opera. I'm pretty sure it's not a pure wrestling show. Like, New Japan is a pure wrestling show. You know, I would imagine WOW is somewhere closer to WWE than New Japan. I would imagine it's closer to WWE than AEW. I would imagine it's closer to WWE than Impact. You know, just from the clips that I've seen of the WOW roster and the kind of stuff that they do, I just don't see WOW as being a pure wrestling product, but mostly something that people get into and as sort of just a nice little extra, not something that people really go crazy for, if that's, you know. But I'm actually very surprised. But if in order to get about the same percentage of women watching your show as WWE, you had to have a whole wrestling promotion for women, that ain't gonna work, pops. You know, like we're not gonna be able to have, you know, maybe you could try an all women's roster, you know, like an all women's pay-per-view, you know, but I don't see that really occurring. I've been a long fan of the idea of doing a women's show, you know, women having their own show. I understand why they didn't do it, because typically when you separate things, like you want to give the women their own show or give the women their own pay-per-view, people get the idea that you're doing so under the hopes that the women aren't successful or that the women will not be successful. And oddly enough, that is what some people try to prove by pitching like the all-women show is, I'm going to prove to you that it won't draw, so do an all-women show. I just think that if your goal is to increase your women's division or your women's viewership, you would do something that WoW would do. And that is increase the visibility of the women on your show by making it all women. You know, but I can't, again, just one statistic that it's taken in a specific context of television, Nielsen, is not enough to tell me what is drawing a female audience. Because it could be income levels, that this is a syndicated wrestling show and, you know, women are watching television. I think they watch television less than men do, or they watch television more than men. I don't know which one it is really. I forget. I used to know those kinds of things off the top of my head, but now I don't. But I don't know what women like. I really don't. Because the things that women like typically are not things that men like. And wrestling being overwhelmingly male, it shouldn't be a surprise, especially since it includes a lot of fighting and violence and, you know, tough talk. And usually men are very impressed by the action elements, and it is an action drama. I guess if you had to put a hyphen in there somewhere, you could either make it a drama-action or an action-drama. And I think WWE kind of goes for the action-drama. And then during the later days events, it was more of a drama-action, meaning which one is more forward, where, you know, is the matches forward or is the drama forward? And WWE has always been more drama forward, especially in comparison to other wrestling companies, which would explain a lot of the female viewership, is that because it's very drama forward. Or it could be the diversity of the women's wrestlers and the female talent. You have female ring announcers, you have female wrestlers, you have female managers, and you've had this throughout the history of WWE. There's always been a diversity of women on the roster doing different things. So that's always been useful. Even when they were doing lingerie pillow fights, you still had serious women wrestlers on the show. You still had a female boss figure on the show. You still had, you know, a women's title on the show. So you had female wrestlers that were like legitimate wrestlers on the show. You know, they get looked over because people want to focus on lingerie pillow fights or whatever. But there was legitimate women's wrestlers on the show. They just weren't the only thing on the show. There was more of a diversity. But when you look at Impact, which treats women almost like they're male, almost like Jordan Grace, you know, who has like more testosterone in her body than I do, won a women's battle royal over a bunch of men, and only 28% of their audience is female. That's kind of frightening. It's like, what more do you got to do? I mean, they've had women main event pay-per-views in Impact. Women's world champions, I said this already. And 28%. Interesting. But yeah, the product being overwhelmingly male, it should not be a surprise to anybody. But I think the more you push the action elements, the more you get on the male side, which is what explains why the lower female audience for AEW, which is more action forward, you know, more matches, more fast paced explosions, that kind of stuff, blood and things that are not for the family. I think we've kind of done this little piece of analysis before. I would actually like to look at the ages of these females too, because that would be interesting to me as well. But I don't think we have that data. I don't think we got the data on the ages of females, but I would imagine it's they're not over the age of 35. I would imagine it would be probably 18 to 34 would be like the greater number of females. And that's simply because from the information that we saw before, those are the women who typically are more interested in like things like horror movies and action movies. And as women get older, they become less interested in that kind of thing, which is very bizarre because, again, in the past, it used to be teenage girls and little old ladies were like the main audience for like Southern pro wrestling, for like world class. All the girls were in love with the Von Erichs, all the teenage girls or whatever, and they were basically heartthrobs. But then you would go over to Mid-South and it would be mostly little old ladies, mostly grandmas, and and they were into the dramatic elements of it. So it's hard to tell, but it's always good to have this kind of information. All right, so what does this stuff tell us about anything? Well, it doesn't tell us much because you could have guessed all of this because it's all linked. Once you recognize that, white males make more money than other demographics. If you have more white males in your audience, then your demographics go in that direction. So this leads us to the income debate. So this takes us to another graph. So there's a graph for all the same shows: Dynamite, Rampage, Raw, Collision, NXT, SmackDown, WoW, New Japan, and Impact. And they go exactly in that order. $61,500 is the average income of somebody who watches AEW Dynamite. $59,700 is the average income of somebody who watches Rampage. $54,300 is the average of somebody who watches Raw. $51,200, the average of somebody who watches Collision. NXT, $48,900. SmackDown, $47,900. WoW, $42,800. New Japan, $41,700. And Impact, $37,600. So $37,600. Now, of course, this leads us to the SmackDown debate. Is that the fans simply don't make enough money to justify the ad revenue for Fox. Now, when you take into account, of course, that SmackDown was on network television, yeah, this makes sense because you don't have to pay to watch SmackDown. It's on network television, which means everybody with a television has it, which appeals greatly to blacks and Hispanics. I've talked about this before. It goes back. This is not new information. All right. The specifics are new, but I could find you articles from 2000 where they said almost the exact same thing. And I'm saying right now that when SmackDown was on UPN, it appealed heavily to blacks and Hispanics, mainly because it wasn't on cable. It was something that they had access to, and you did not need to pay to watch it. Now, part of this is going to be taken into account. If you are watching Dynamite and Rampage and AEW shows, then you are more likely to have cable, correct? Which means you're more likely to pay for it, correct? If you're paying $50 for pay-per-views, you've probably got some cash. So Tony Khan's not an idiot, not a complete one anyway. He sees that he's got a fan base who makes a little bit of money, have some extra disposable income, and he decides to tax you by charging you $50 for pay-per-views. WWE says we have a diverse fan base. They prefer a cheaper option. So we're going to give it away, WrestleMania and all, $5 on Peacock. $6 or something like that. I think it's up to $12 for no ads now or something to that effect, right? So it's a cheaper option. You don't need to be a multimillionaire to be able to follow the WWE pay-per-views. You just need to be able to pay $12, and that's a month, I believe. So what's 12 times 12? 144. So that's $144 a month, a year. thereabouts, which is a lot if you're being honest. That's about what a cable bill is, but that would be per month versus per year. Like a cable bill can sometimes be $200, almost $300 a month. When you can cut that in half just by getting Peacock, and you'll still get Raw and SmackDown and all that kind of stuff. You'll just get it later. So it gets uploaded to Peacock. I think a couple of weeks you'll have it. That's just Raw because you don't want to pay the cable bill. Or you can always sell the high seas and watch Raw whenever you want. But this is just ways of interpreting data. And when you're in sort of the marketing realm, that's what you're being paid to do. You're being paid to interpret data. So one of the arguments I've seen is that AEW fans make more money. Therefore, Fox should give their money to AEW because they can give you a return on that investment. Well, that's simple. That's not bad. It's not a bad estimation. It doesn't take into account everything, but it's not a bad estimation. What doesn't it take into account? One is that people are always going to be looking for a more diverse audience. The idea that you appeal to a higher level of income, well, they're going to break that down by race. They're also going to break it down by gender. They're also going to break it down by places. So you could say you have a more affluent group of people, but your top market is Chicago and New York and LA. All right. Which is good because you want to be able to be a hit in all those big towns, but you only appeal to the white people in those towns and they have growing black populations. Or you may have a woke network executive who say, hey, we should be trying to get more women to watch this show. This is where you start becoming more, you need to fit the brand, and that becomes very important. Sometimes people don't care about the income of the people watching the show if it appeals to the right people. Like when they used to have gay television shows or whatever, it didn't always appeal to certain demographics, but it appealed to the demographics that they wanted at the time, and therefore they had no problem with it. For a long time, the NBA did not appeal to the right demographics because it was mostly broke black people. But then when you start building a culture around it in terms of jerseys, footwear, you had the basketball players being able to get guys to spend $200 on shoes. Okay, so the NBA just embraced it. And then they just brought everybody else along. Now, you have to take into account another thing I want to have to get into. And I don't want to offend any of my white friends, but I want you to realize this is something, again, you have to go back in time. I watched a documentary probably about 5 or 6 years ago on MTV. And people were wondering, how does MTV always know when to appeal to the younger demographic? That by that demographic, they were going to pick their advertisers, etc., by that demographic. And this was the documentary was made in 2000. So what they did is they had people, and by they, I mean MTV, they paid a staff of people to go around and meet the kinds of children who watched MTV. And then to pay the kids, let me rummage through your room. I'm completely legit when I say this, by the way. I know it sounds like a joke, but I'm not. They would go and they would look through their CDs. What are you listening to? They would look at your clothes. What are you wearing? What kind of posters do you have on the wall? What kind of movies are you watching? And they would take these notes and they would take them to MTV. And that's how they would build the network. I decided to give you a little bit more because I couldn't remember the title of it. So I went and looked it up, and it's called The Merchants of Cool, and it was actually on PBS. Here is part of the synopsis. Teenagers are the hottest consumer demographic in America. At 33 million strong, they comprise the largest generation of teens America has seen, larger even than the much ballyhooed baby boomer generation. Last year, America's teens spent $100 billion while influencing their parents to the tune of $50 billion. But marketing to teens isn't as easy as it sounds. Marketers have found a way to seem real, true to the lives and attitudes of teenagers, in short, to become cool themselves. To that end, they search out the next cool thing and have adopted an almost anthropological approach to studying teens and analyzing their every move as if they were animals in the wild. That's exactly what I just said. I remember watching this, dumbfounded that people would participate in this, but they were doing it. They were rummaging through their CDs, looking at their books, their clothes, and everything, in order to figure out what young people were staying hip to and reporting that back to MTV. So let's continue this synopsis real quick. It says, take MTV, long considered to be the arbiter of teen cool. The 1990s saw MTV's ratings on wane. To counter the slide, MTV embarked on a major teen research campaign, the hallmark of which was its ethnography study, visiting teens' homes to view firsthand their lives, interests, and to ask some personal questions. But what lessons do MTV and other companies draw from their exhaustive and expensive study of teenage lives? Does it result in a more nuanced portrait of the American teen? In The Merchants of Cool, Frontline introduces viewers to the mook and the midriff, the stock characters that MTV and others have resorted to in order to hook the teen consumer. Now they go into the mook is sort of like the young man, and the midriff will be the younger girl. You know, what do girls like? What do boys like? That's how it was split into. And the midriff, basically, because girls back in the day will wear shirts that show their belly button and all that kind of stuff. That's where you got the midriff from. I'm not going to go 100% into this because it's a long synopsis and I want everybody to go watch the documentary for yourselves. But this is why I got so interested in things like marketing. When I watch these people rummage through CDs and clothes and pretty much everything, I'm telling you, it was shocking. And that's when I realized these folks will go to no end to find the money. They will find the money in your auntie's couch cushions if they have to. They just want information. So when people look at something like what WrestleNomics has put out here, and they say you should make multi-billion-dollar business decisions based off this, you can't. This is what they were doing 20 years ago. Just imagine what they're doing now. They're not just putting out surveys. I know WWE does the occasional survey. They'll send people questions. Hey, what do you think about this? Or what do you think about that? Nah, they're breaking it down. There's a reason why pretty much every other song was a rap song in WWE. Or all of the theme songs sounds like rap songs. While 25 years ago or whatever, it was all rock music. What did you think happened? Rap took over rock. Rock used to be the cool thing with children. Now rap is the cool thing with children. And I literally watched it happen. Okay, I literally saw the transition. I watched the transition on MTV because it started there first. WWE was actually late to the rap game. Even though they were kind of involved, like Salt and Pepper and Run DMC, which Run DMC in the, what was this, 2001 when Run DMC showed up at WrestleMania 2000, Ice-T, like they were in the 80s. So they were behind the times even then. But when you look at staying cool or appealing to a certain demographic, especially the 18 to 49 demographic that AEW loves to talk about, those people are not thinking that AEW is cool. That's a good demographic to have a demographic that have money. But when you're running a network and you're trying to get into that NBA audience, that NBA audience is going to be young black dudes who listen to rap music and buy Jordans. And those are going to be the people that they're going to put in your face because that's their audience. That's the people that they want to have. They want to build a culture around them. You build brand loyalty so that people will spend money in those circles. This is why you have very niche products that appeal to very, very certain demographics like women or gays or even babies, because babies don't have their own money. But how many times have you seen somebody get tons of Baby Shark or Paw Patrol stuff? Because there's an entire ecosystem built around children. There's an entire economy built around toddlers between 0 and 4. There's an incredible demographic for everything. You have to appeal to a certain demographic. So we don't know who Fox is trying to appeal to. So we can't tell whether AEW will fit that mold or not. So that's just one thing. There's a lot of information that needs to be taken into account. But we can look at the television breakdowns of race and income and giggle about it, but we can't really do anything with it because a lot of it is going to be contextualized via just television. What happens if you take NXT off of USA and put it on CW? Are they still going to have a 27% black audience? Is the audience going to stay 56% white? Is the income level going to stay the same, or is it going to go down? We don't know, because this is all contextualized through Nielsen ratings and television. Doesn't take into account TikTok, which appeals to the younger demographic, or Facebook, or any of the other social media, the YouTube. Doesn't take into account global, fan bases. Like, this is all very highly contextualized to the United States, and specifically probably big markets like Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, Miami, etc., Texas and whatever, right? So it doesn't tell you as much as you think, but it's interesting to discuss, and it's fun, so I got a kick out of it. What do you guys think? Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below, and I'll talk to you later.